Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
How are you, Jason? Last time you were entering your week of single fatherhood.
Yeah.
How did it go?
Well, clearly I survived.
You did. Did the kids?
Just.
Yeah.
All I can say is thank goodness for Uber Eats. I don't know how I would have survived a week with 3 kids without Uber Eats. I don't know how any parent did it beforehand on their own without Uber Eats.
Yeah.
Look, don't get me wrong. I did cook a few meals, but they were pretty simple meals. And I did get a bit of help during the days because it was school holidays, so I could still come into the office and get some things done. So, but no, I don't know what my wife complains about. Seriously, they're very easy kids.
You literally just went from saying I don't know how people did it without Uber Eats to saying you don't know what your wife complains about.
Yeah, I just started to think about my my track, and I was like, no, I could actually use this to go. Well, look, let's face it, my wife's never going to listen to an episode of the show, so I probably can't really lie. No, they were a handful, but we lived.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah. Surviving is the important part.
It is, right?
Arguably the most important part.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the minimal thing, right?
Yeah.
Let's like survival needs, and then move up from that. So we had some good time. We went for a run together and played some basketball together, and it was good father and kid bonding time.
Good for you.
Yeah. So it was more than just surviving. So yes. So thank you, Joelle. I'm doing well.
I'm pleased to hear it.
Well, look, hopefully our guest is doing well. He's joining us from the other side of the world, so we should probably welcome him in.
Mm-hmm.
So this person is a people leader and coach with a background in product development and agile coaching. He works to create nurturing cultures based on trust, empowerment, transparency, and continuous improvement. He is currently Chief People Officer at Zappi. Welcome to the podcast, Tom Holliss.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Noel. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on. Joel's given me a bit of background about some of the things that you guys have discussed leading into this podcast. So I'm really interested to do this conversation with you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm feeling a lot of empathy for you as well. I've got a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old, and I'm about to take them both for the first time while my wife goes away for the weekend. She has a very well-deserved break. I'm like, okay, I've just got a handle on one. I've taken 2 for a few days. I'm a bit worried about it. It's going to be fine, though. So
you can do it. Yeah.
We're gonna have fun.
Nice one.
If the mums can do it, the dads can do it. That's all I have to say about that.
100%.
You can weaponize your incompetence all you like, Jason. You're not fooling me. So, Tom, tell us about your favorite podcast.
Oh, good question. So, I'll give you a couple. So, I'll give you like a couple from a work perspective, and also one that I'm just super interested in. Really, really fascinating. So it would be wrong if I didn't shout out. We actually do Zappi, the company I currently work for, does a podcast called Insights, and it's working with people in our industry and thought leaders and people like that who are really interested in how businesses can listen more to customers, and also how we could build more good progressive cultures and that sort of stuff. So Insights is really brilliant. We just won an award for it, which is really, really cool. And another one is run by a woman called Melissa Boggs, who's over in the States, and she used to lead. She is a leader within the agile space, and she does one called Wild Hearts at Work. And she just goes around and interviews different people who are taking a really unique or creative stance or progressive stance on the future of work. So if you listen to that, there's this whole back catalogue of really, really amazing interviews. The podcast I really love is a podcast called Conflicted, and it's a guy called Eamon Dean telling his story. He's such an interesting character. A bit random for this podcast, but he was an Al Qaeda bomb maker who then went on to flip, and he went and worked for MI5 for many years as a really high level informant within Al Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And then eventually his cover got blown. He had to move to the West. He became a consultant for banks, looking at terrorism, finance, and all that. And the podcast is just him telling the story of the last few decades of the Middle East. And what's fascinating about it for me is just how we misunderstood like the roots of the culture that was informing the movements in that region over the last few years, and how all of our actions were based on this just fundamental misunderstanding of people, actually. And it honestly, it's a really intense podcast, but it's so interesting. I really recommend it. Conflicted by Eamon Dean.
I've been looking for a new one, so I might give that one a shot.
Yeah.
Well, I'll report back in.
I don't think anybody has mentioned any of those ones before, no. Tom. So that's great. Listeners, get onto that. Some good tips there. So can you tell us then about your professional career, please?
Yeah, definitely. So my early career after academia, I kind of graduated as a social researcher, did some postgrad in social research. And the first few years of my career, I spent working for businesses, doing consumer research, actually talking to people, interviewing people, running focus groups, understanding the experiences that people were having, both from commercial businesses and also from some social organizations as well. But yeah, understanding their relationships to products and services and things like that. And that really, in the end, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. But what I loved about it was what it triggered in me, which is a kind of curiosity for the human experience, right? Like meeting people, understanding their different experiences, understanding how they relate to the products and services around them. And then, through that, I ended up joining this business and ended up in a product role, getting a startup off the ground. And I did that for a number of years. And so really kind of got into that product mindset, learned a lot about agile product development and all these sorts of things. And again, I realized after a while, if you look back, Zappi's it's the same business. If you look back at the very old versions of our website, you'll realize why product wasn't my calling, because it's not great. But there you go. I realized actually after a few years, you know what, there's other people that can do this better than me. But what I learned from that, the approach that I learned from that, I really have applied very much in everything I've done then, which is, I would summarize it as like set a really ambitious vision of where you want to go, and really try to like shoot for the stars. And then every day, just turn up to iterate, listen to data, listen to conversations, really try to understand different people's experiences, but just show up every day with the energy to iterate and make things better, And so that iterative approach was really key to product. And it's actually the same thing now that I apply. I've been doing this people role for sort of about 3 or 4 years now. And it's the same approach that I apply to this, taking that kind of product visioning and iteration approach, but then applying it to culture, to people-focused systems, all of that sort of stuff. So that's a very kind of brief sort of those 3 areas. There's a lot more in there, but hopefully that gives you a good flavor of what I'm about.
Yeah, interesting switch from product to sort of the people HR kind of a function. I'm interested in, I guess, the perspectives that product experience has given you, and then actually thinking about potentially the employer as a product and the employee experience in interacting with that product, if you like, and if that sort of informs how you go about your people strategy.
Yeah, definitely it does. And actually what I say to our team is that we're the product managers of our internal systems and processes and our culture. Jason, you said it, like part of my background is in agile coaching, and actually there's a lot of overlap, particularly as you think about the people space moving from being about policy and about compliance and about managing risk, to being, let's make an amazing place for people to work. Like, what does a really high performing culture look like, where people can turn up and feel whole and feel, fully productive and fully themselves? And I think as you start to shift, there's actually a huge amount of commonalities. And that's why, that podcast I talked about, the Wild Hearts at Work one, like, Melissa she's an agile coach, she's done all kinds of different things, business leader. But actually a lot of that stuff, the 2 worlds bleed together so much. And there is a big movement of like agile-HR. So, when I was doing that role previously, when I was doing that product role, a lot of that, I was focused on delivery, and I want to do, I did get excited about taking digital products to market. But actually the thing that really excited me was, we've got these groups of people around, we've got these teams, how can we create the conditions? How can we work with them to like create a really amazing place to work, where we can all be our, like, we can all, I don't want to be cliche, but like be our best selves, do our best work, and that stuff really got me excited. And I was always doing that in 30% of my time and then getting dragged back into delivery and blah, blah, blah. And so actually when the opportunity came to be like, no, I could just focus on this. I could just focus on building an amazing place to work. It's like wicked. And now honestly, I love it. I get up every day and my job is build an amazing place to work. Yes.
Yeah, you can really hear this continuous improvement, as we talked about in your background. That's something that you do, right? It's about iterating. And I guess traditionally HR isn't seen as something that iterates very quickly. But it's about creating or crafting these experiences, and that needs to change over time. And you do that through consultation with the workforce, and you continue to tinker. And the environment changes, people's expectation changes, macro events change, and so you just always have to be listening and improving. It's funny, as you said, about just get better, or every day just get better. Something that I say to my son when I put him to bed at night. He's 13 years old now. I'm like, Riley, just be better tomorrow. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I was good. I'm like, yeah, but just be better tomorrow. Like,
I feel like there's a lot in the tone of voice there that
it is confusing. I always have to explain it to him again. I'm like, just like, how can you improve yourself, or what can you learn tomorrow, or what could you do that just makes you a little bit better tomorrow? Yeah.
And I think that's I was reading an article about this yesterday, just on kind of emotional intelligence and almost like 24-hour cycles where, like, okay, you've had a really great day, like, or you've done some really great stuff, fantastic, own that, live it, but the next day is a new day, or you've had a really rubbish day, things have been really difficult, it's really weighing heavily on you. Okay, it's another day, like try and put that aside. And it's almost just that reset a little bit. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I do like to mess with my son a bit, as might have come out, but but I do like to encourage him to not be complacent.
I'm going to start saying that to you at the end of every day, Jason. Just be better tomorrow.
That's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah. Are you?
Yeah. Tom, you probably haven't heard any of our previous podcasts. This is on brand for Joelle, so it's okay. And it's a Friday evening, so she's already checked out. Hey, so what brought us to, brought you to our attention was a post on LinkedIn about changes you made to your company's unlimited leave policy. Can you describe to our listeners what the change was and why was it made?
Yeah, definitely. To put this in context, so Zappi is a business. We're about 8 years old, 300 people or so. It's not massive, but we're growing quite quickly. About half of those in the UK, about 100 or so in the States, and then we got people kind of dotted all. We got about 30 people in Cape Town. Everyone else is dotted all over the place. But we've always tried to run the business with trust at the core of what we do. We try to keep hold of, like, yes, we need a bit more structure and process as we scale and everything, but like, we loved what it was like when we were a startup. We loved the flexibility that we all had, and all of that sort of stuff. And actually, like, we just got on with our work, and we wanted to try and keep that culture as we scaled. So that finds its place in policies that are very lightweight and open-ended. So because we just trust people, like, yes, okay, you can have unlimited holiday because we trust that you know what you need to do to get the job done. Our intention is that you're well rested and that you can come in and you can be, like, fully focused in your work and all of that sort of stuff. So, like, take as much time as you need. We trust you. It works really well, actually. And I think overall, it works really well. People love the flexibility. People love, like, I love it because I can do nice, like, summer holidays. I never feel bad about taking a Friday off. Like, I really, like, it's great to feel trusted. What we noticed over a period of time is that the data, how much time are people taking off, it's basically just like a bell curve. Like, most people were taking roughly the statutory, like, in the UK, that's like 28 days, 30 days for their region. A few people were taking quite a lot, and a few people were taking less. Right? So we looked at it and said, look, there's a tension here, because we want to treat people like adults. Like, we don't want to, like, be parents to people, but we also do want to be compassionate and supportive. And we think it's an important principle that people take enough time off, that they're well rested, and when they're at work, they're able to give it their whole and their focus. So we looked at it and said, you know what, this isn't quite working for us. What I was doing before was just, for those people, I was just reaching out to them saying, hey, what's going on? Like, you know, is there anything we can do? Like, you know, it doesn't look like you're taking very much time. Let's talk about it. We decided, actually, let's be a bit more opinionated about it. So we said, let's move from this unlimited policy to saying it's uncapped. So you can take as much as you want. You know, the premise is, if you do 6 months, if you do a year's worth of work in 6 months, why not take like 2 months off, or whatever it is, you know. But so it continues to be uncapped, but we said, actually, our expectation is that you take a good amount of leave, at least like the baseline. And we modeled it on the UK statutory, which is, yeah, like kind of 28 days or something. But it varies a little bit depending on what your national holidays are locally. But yeah, we said, let's go for a minimum, really insist that people take enough, but it's also uncapped. That makes sense.
Yeah. And what was the employee response to that change?
Yeah, really good. Yeah, really good. I think, you know, we talked about that, like, iteration. I think one part of that is just, you know, constantly thinking, constantly listening, and also being able to move quite fast. And when you do that, I think generally people recognize it goes beyond just the individual policies. Like, they recognize that actually you care and that you're thinking about it and you're being proactive. And I think so it went down really well. And you know, it was a really nice thing, because I sort of been thinking about it for a while. I feel like this isn't quite right. And somebody suggested it to me. I'd sort of been mulling it over, and somebody came to me and said, what do you think about this? I was like, cool, let's do it. So I sent one message to our leadership team on Slack, and I sent one message to the company on Slack. I'm thinking about doing this. Does anyone have any feedback? We do this thing called the advice process. Just ask anyone who's impacted by a decision and some people who understand the area, who are experts, before you move forward. So I did it in 2 Slack messages. Nobody objected. Everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. So then we just did it pretty much straight away, updated our internal handbook, and then we went.
Yeah, terrific. And how long has that been in place for now, the new policy?
Just since the start of the year.
Yeah. So are those, have you checked, have those employees that weren't taking leave before, have they actually taken some now?
Yeah, do you know what? It's a bit early to say what the real impact is. But yeah, I think it is. You can kind of see it starting to have an impact. But we're sort of having some conversations at the moment. You know what? Like, policy is only ever one part of the solution, right? Like, when there are people, you know, like, it might be systemic things around, you know, like the team pressures or things like that. But oftentimes, like, we as individuals just, like, we push ourselves, don't we? Like, there's something ingrained in some people that just want to push. And so actually trying to address that, you know, the policy is great, like, it really helps. It creates a really positive environment for people. People appreciate it, like you're saying, Jason. But on the flip side, you also actually have to get in and understand, get under the skin of it a little bit, and understand, like, what is it that's driving those behaviors.
Yeah, that's it. Because, you know, there are people who, you know, they get a lot of meaning and purpose from their work, and, you know, they might not have a life outside of work, and they just really want to engage and continue to do that. But, you know, then it's maybe about the company then putting in the boundaries for them if they can't set their own.
But I think that's the really important tension that you've nailed, which is something I think about a lot, between being overly parental with people and also affecting them as adults, and, you know, able to make their own decisions. And, like, if you really want to work your ass off for a bit, like, why, like, you know, that's like a decision that you can make. And I think about it in terms of like, we have really flexible hours, for example. Like, you just define where you work and when you work, right, and how you work. And, you know, for me, like, and with kids, and, you know, I like to go out and do exercise in the day and all that sort of stuff, I tend to do quite normal working hours. But there are some engineers who just prefer to be more nocturnal. They prefer to work at night.
We've got some of those in our team. Yep, for sure.
Right. And I sort of wonder, like, you know, is that healthy in the long term to be doing that? Is that? But ultimately, that's their decision, and as long as they're happy with their teams and they can make sure that, collaborative work gets done like when it needs to be done and all that sort of stuff. Like, I'm not going to argue with it, but that's the sort of the tension to manage, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So a leave policy is obviously one aspect of an overall wellbeing strategy. Can you tell us about sort of more broadly about your approach to employee wellbeing?
Yes, yeah, I can. I think so. Our work kind of broadly goes across 3 different areas. So I'd say the first is working to create a culture of positive well-being. I'll tell you all 3 and then I'll kind of drill into them a little bit. The second one is normalizing different experiences of mental health and trying to talk about them and that sort of stuff, and health more broadly. And the third is providing support for people. Right. So I think that's how I sort of see it, is you need to kind of really invest and give time in creating a culture of positive well-being. You need to talk about it, and also you need to provide support for people, particularly when they're having challenging experiences. So on that first point, I've kind of chatted a bit about it, but one of the big things we do is just try and maintain real flexibility for people. And that, to me, that's so important, because the more you allow individuals to define their own experience of work, the greater their well-being is going to be. The fact that I can, go for a run in the afternoon when I've got a spot, or like go and jump in the swimming pool or something, when I know that I've got to do childcare at either ends, and then maybe I can catch up a little bit in the evening, and that's sort of after they've all gone to bed. Like, the fact that I have that flexibility is actually huge for my well-being. It's also a massive thing, talk about this, but the link between issues around diversity and inclusion and well-being is really big. And this is one of those intersections, I think, because, if you do have caring responsibilities, if you have stuff going on in your life related to who you are, being able to define your experience of work is like super, super important. So that's the first thing. We do things like we try to get people talking. We've got we built a little app that matches people up for like weekly coffees. So trying to build some of those social connections. We do lots of like well-being perks. We do like yoga, like, we were just about to, like nice healthy snacks for people in the offices. We're just about to roll out a well-being allowance and that sort of stuff. And then also some of the stuff that we've already talked about. So yeah, like the minimum holiday policy. We encourage people to take personal days. So when you log leave, you can log sick leave, you can log holiday, or you can log personal time. And we've also actually, this year, we did it for the first time last year. We closed the company for a day. We did like a company mental health day, and now we've actually got one Friday next week, where we just close the whole company, so nobody works. We're doing one every couple of months or so now, and it's really nice because I get this still, like when I take time off, like I'm one of those people, because I also think I'm running a team, and it's important how I show up. I definitely disconnect when I'm on holiday. I still have that niggling feeling of being like, oh, I'm going to come back to loads of messages, and like, I'm kind of, things are moving really fast, and I get this sort of like fear of like FOMO, fear of missing out on lots. So like everyone being off at the same time is brilliant. You just don't have any of that. So shouldn't make a difference, but it does. So yeah, there's a lot of that. That's the sort of overarching on creating kind of a culture of positive well-being. So there's quite a few different things in there. When we think about normalizing mental health, it's something that requires consistent attention, because when are there spaces to talk about mental health and well-being unless you create them? It's like, when would you? And we did last year for World Mental Health Day, a couple of colleagues approached me and said, we'd like to talk about our experiences. So I went out and said, this is a great idea. I sort of sent a message out. I've got a few more people. So we had about 10 or 12 people in the end, talking about their varying experiences of mental health at work, and the challenges that they'd experienced, and the things that had helped them, and all this sort of stuff. And we edited it together into a video that we shared with everyone. And it was genuinely one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had at work. It was intense. And I was like, I was in tears when I watched it, and a lot of other people were. And it just said to me, like, just really made me think, like, you really have to work to create these spaces to talk about this stuff. You really, really do. So that's what we kind of focus on. We had some leadership people involved in that, because I do think there's something about setting a tone for openness around this stuff. And then, we're doing things like having people come in and talk. Like we just did a talk about burnout, like what are the different factors that might inform burnout, going beyond just overwork and stuff like that. So we try and create little talks and workshops and things to kind of get people opening up about this stuff. So that's like normalizing mental health. And then the last bit is support for individuals and support for managers. So we did mental health first aiders. It hasn't really worked for us. People didn't, it got used a little bit, and we did sort of advertise it. But the learning for me there was actually, talking to colleagues isn't what people always necessarily want, which is okay as well, right? About their specific issues. So what we invested in this, we invested in this app called Spill, which sits in our Slack instance, and it's really good. It allows people to book counselling and therapy sessions with trained therapists, and it also has like a whole toolkit and support for managers as well. So you can like write to the therapists if you're worried about a team member, or you can book a session to talk about them, or they do sessions that support managers and individuals as well. So that's been a really positive addition actually, and it gets a lot of use. And again, it's just a signal of like, actually we are investing in this space because we care about it. And then the last thing on the support is we've got quite an active community, a Zappi health community. It's got a Slack channel, and lots of people kind of share articles and thoughts. And we're having a conversation at the moment with some new research that's just been released about access to green spaces and the impact that can have on cognitive abilities and mental health and that sort of stuff. So there's a discussion going on about that at the moment. So yeah, that's a lot of information, but it's those kind of three buckets. Like, how can you create a culture of positive wellbeing? How can you normalize discussions around mental health and wellbeing? And then how can you provide more support for individuals and managers?
Yeah, that's interesting, and sort of a little bit similarities there with the integrated approach in terms of thinking about, how do we protect people? How do we help them recover? And how do we prevent harm? So, yeah.
So you talked about a number of different initiatives there, and like you said, not everything that you have tried has worked, but I guess that's a learning process as well, right? If you try something and it doesn't work, well, you've learned something as well. But if you have to think about all the different things, particularly, in relation to maybe even workplace culture, what do you think has the greatest influence on employee wellbeing?
Yeah, like you said, we have tried a number of different things. It's funny because you could look at this at the level of like tactics. So what are the things that you've done that have had the greatest impact? Or you could look at it at a kind of mindset level. And for me, that's the most important thing. And I would just summarize it as a really compassionate approach to running an organization. And when people know that they're in a compassionate organization, they feel safe and they feel able to do the things that they need to do in order to look after themselves. And like you say, when they need to like that compassionate organization naturally provides support and protection for people. It naturally provides spaces for people to recover and all that sort of thing. So I'll give you an example. Like we do have a sick leave policy. We do have like a bereavement policy. We rarely ever look at them. Like if somebody's really ill or if somebody has a family bereavement, we sit down with them and say, what do you need? Like how can we support you? You need to take time off, go and take time off. We're going to be here when you get back. Like, is there anything that we can do? And when they get back, like, okay, how, check in on them. How are you? What do you need from us? And all those things. Like, you might lose a week for that person's productivity, but that person feels seen and they feel like they matter, and they're very unlikely to leave. So it's not only like the right thing to do, and it means that you're working in an organization where people feel good and you feel good about it, but it's also like it just makes business sense. It really just makes business sense. And I often think that's the sort of tension, is that we put all of these policies and procedures in place because we want to like manage risk, and we want to make sure that we don't lose out on, you know, the productivity that people are going to bring to the organization. Look, we're a profit making business. We don't want to do that as well. So much easier to quantify that potential risk than it is to think, actually, like if we just had a really open-ended approach, like the potential upside is so much bigger. You know, it's so bigger. So yeah, I would say that, like, real compassion, and from compassion you end up with, well, for us anyway, allowing people to really design their experience of work. So real flexibility. So you can kind of design how everything works in line with your life and your varying commitments. And sometimes work will figure more strongly, and sometimes it'll be pulled in different directions. Jason, like looking after 3 kids on your own, you know, like, and so I think if you give people that space, then it does a huge amount. I also think there's something from a sort of systemic perspective. There's something really important about ensuring people, and you might say that this is a bit of a luxury, like we're a bit of a hippie tech company, but ensuring people have got goals that are achievable and in line with what they care about, you know, because I feel like after so long of working on something that you don't care about, or like if it feels like the game is rigged, or it feels like there's a lack of fairness, or you're not going to be able to achieve the things that you're working on, or whatever it is, it's really hard to like show up every day and feel good about your work. So I think that sort of thinking a little bit more systemically, there's something there about like making sure the rules of the game are really clear and transparent, and people perceive that there's fairness in an organization, making sure people are working on the stuff that they're passionate about, making sure the goals that they've got are achievable so they can balance their work with everything else that they're doing as well. So yeah, I'd say that those are sort of the main areas.
Yeah, so much to unpack from that. I guess the summary there is, yeah, be compassionate and you know, to operate with a lot of trust, I guess, as well, right? I was listening to a recent podcast episode from Adam Grant. Shout out to Adam Grant if you're listening. We are still waiting for your call to come on. We also are on LinkedIn, and we'll put maybe our phone number in the show notes for you as well.
You can put your number in the show notes.
Okay, I'll put my number in the show notes. But yeah, he was talking about flexibility, right? And how, you know, giving people flexibility is great, but, you know, maybe after they've earned it. So you don't just, you know, some of the things that you're talking about, you know, giving them ultimate trust and allowing them to craft their own, you know, kind of work experiences and setting their own hours and that sort of thing. Well, you don't necessarily do that on day one, but once the person has demonstrated that they are making good decisions and, you know, their values are aligned with the business, then you can start to give them more of that flexibility. What do you think about that? Like, is flexibility and kind of that ability to craft your own work something that happens day one, or is it something that happens at a different rate?
Such an interesting question, isn't it? Such an interesting question. I think it comes down to mindset. Like, do you just implicitly trust people, or do you have a mindset where people need to earn that trust? And for me, I'm the former. So I would rather legislate for the vast majority of people who just want to show up every day and do good work and have an impact, and, you know, have a positive impact on the people and the organization. So I would rather legislate for them and then deal with those edge cases like as they show up. And, you know, oftentimes those things will just be people who've made mistakes, or they haven't understood the rules of the game, or they've come from an environment where, you know, the behaviors and the things that they've had to do to get along are different to what they need to do now. And so actually it's just about a bit of a shift of mindset, and that doesn't just happen overnight. And, you know, that's been a really interesting kind of experience for us as we've scaled. We've looked, I passionately believe in culture add rather than culture fit, right? Like, what we want to do, we're scaling a business, what we want to do over the next couple of years, the things we need to do to get where we're going are not the things that we've done up until this point when we've got here. So why would we look for some kind of archetypal Zappi person to come in who fits a certain mold. No, we want different thinkers. When you bring different thinkers in, they challenge the status quo, they challenge the prevailing ways of doing things. And that's really healthy tension. Some of that will harness and will help us evolve. Some of that is actually on individuals to change, because those underlying principles of trust and flexibility and those sort of things, like those are really important to us. So yeah, I sort of instinctive. I know where you're coming from, Jason. I get it, but instinctively I sort of think, no, like why can't we just assume that people are trustworthy and that we're, there's this other, like I've heard this. You hear a lot about like millennials and Gen Z and the things that they want from work, as if somehow this like new generation is so different to the rubbish. Everyone wants autonomy in their work. Everyone wants to feel passionate about what they're doing, feel a sense of connection. It's just like now that's more available to people than it was before. And we socialize people into not having those things. Like you show me somebody who's 50 and you show me somebody who's 18, and yes, they're going to have different needs and requirements, but the fundamentals remain the same. And I think, if you just offer those to people from day one, like if you don't offer them to people from day one, it's like for me, it's a bit of a weird vibe, because you're not then socializing them into that environment.
Yeah. I know I have been challenged, because I love giving people ultimate flexibility as well, right? Like we recruit people who are really good at what they do, and they'll work harder sometimes or longer sometimes, and then sure, if they need to leave early or work from home one day, sure. But I have been challenged myself as a leader. I mean, we've got a developer who's been here since day one, pretty much, and we decided to give his younger brother a shot in the business as a software developer as well. But pretty quickly after his younger brother started, he started following his older siblings kind of work patterns, like, oh yeah, I slept in, so I'm in at 11 today, and oh, you know what, I woke up really late today, so I'm just going to work from home for the rest of the day, or or pushing back really hard on things because he saw his brother doing it. And I don't know if it was a sibling thing or if it was a colleague thing. Maybe it's a very unique situation. I don't know. But I was tested about how much flexibility am I willing to give people with that. And I'm thinking, oh, you know what? Your brother's earned it. He's done some hard yards. He's pulled some all-nighters for the company. You're pretty new. How much flexibility have you earned? So it's interesting, right? I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer for it, and it might depend on the individual. But I've been tested with my thinking on it.
but I think like the really important, like the other side to this is not like a kind of like hippy dippy, everyone do what they want, around. We're a profit making business. We have responsibilities to our shareholders and to our customers, and also to our employees as well. So I think the other part of this kind of culture, which is super, super important, is the ability to have honest adult to adult conversations about things. So yeah, in those sorts of situations, being able to talk about it and being like, do you know what, is this the best way to be working? Like when you're really new into the business and new into the industry, like, like,
yeah. And fortunately, I was able to put it down to his line manager to have that conversation rather than me. But it was grating.
yeah, I can understand that.
So I think a lot of what we've been talking about, where you're talking about having these very sort of bare bones, open-ended policies, and that's really grounded in that culture of trust. And arguably that's much easier to create in a small organization. So I'm interested to explore how you've been able to maintain that trust-based culture as you've grown.
Yeah, it's funny. I still see us as quite a small organization. So we, but we have gone through, a few rounds of scaling. It's a super interesting question because, and it's a question I've heard quite a bit. I would question the premise of the question though, because why does it have to be harder? Why can't you do, there are plenty of organizations that do it at scale. There's a brilliant book called Reinventing Organizations by a guy called Frederick Laloux. And it's all about how He did a case study of about 10 or 12 different businesses, all of them over 500 people, some of them into the tens of thousands. And the commonalities that pull them all together, he calls them, it's like teal, he calls it, it's like teal movement. And what brings them together is like wholeness, so bringing your whole self to work, evolutionary purpose over top-down management, so kind of purpose and direction that like bubbles up as well as comes down, and self-management, so teams that manage themselves. And you know, there are, like I talked about the advice process, for example, which is the intention behind the advice process is you empower people across the business to make decisions about how they work and what they're working on and that sort of stuff. And you just say, as long as you're consulting with everyone who's impacted and some people who are experts, then you're empowered to make a decision and you don't need sign off, you don't need approval. That came from a company called AES, that are a power like generation utilities business, the 10,000, 12,000 employees globally, and their CEO implemented that across the business. EDF, big kind of French energy provider, they're very big in Europe, but also globally. They're part, like I spoke to somebody, a leader who was doing this in a hydroelectric dam. He runs a hydroelectric dam in Strasbourg, and he's doing exactly the same thing, like complete autonomy for people across the business within a framework of compliance. You know, like they've got responsibilities to the environment, to local community, to employees, safety, all of that. So it's highly regulated. Within that framework, they say you're empowered to make decisions about how we run this dam and how we do things. So even in really complex environments, I think you can operate like this. I think there are assumptions that as you get bigger, and it does cause tensions, like having an open-ended approach does cause tensions, and we're constantly thinking about them, right? Our expenses policy is just spend company money like it's your own. If you want to travel, think about the environmental impact, think about the cost to the business, weigh it up against the value that traveling is going to provide before you make a decision. Some people interpret that in different ways. We could wrap a policy around that, and then that would, you know, ensure that there's fairness across the board, but it would also start to eat away at that culture, we feel like. So the approach I always try to take is one of minimal viable policies, which is like very much my like product background coming through. So what are the policies that we need in order for people to feel whole, productive, you know, feel that there's fairness and equity in the business, and also, yeah, for us to be compliant as well. And we lean towards addressing things through conversations rather than through policies. And that's how we've sort of worked to scale. So when these tensions emerge, like we'll have a conversation about them and try and find the right approach for us, rather than just being like, oh, right now we're putting a blanket kind of budget in for everyone to do travel. And this is because as soon as you start to do that, people make decisions within those constraints, and they're not really necessarily the best decisions. Like, oh, I can't travel now because there's a centralized budget for it, even though that's super important to me and my success in my role. I can't do it because we've done this, because we've put this like budget in and I've already used it up, and so I can't do that anymore. So it doesn't make sense. So that, I'd say that's, yeah, that minimal viable policy approach is a sort of lens for looking at each of these issues as we scale.
It seems like a lot of this rests on assumptions about the roles of leaders within the organization as well. And so you talked there about sort of self-managing teams. And obviously, as you grow, you do need some sort of a hierarchy. And, you know, how flat can you actually reasonably go? So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So we do have a hierarchy. So we have a senior leadership team. We've got a couple of different levels in the organization. We actually we're 8 years old. We've only just introduced a manager role within our engineering teams, which accounts for about a third of the business. We did it this year for the first time. My personal view is there are really important leadership roles that managers tend to fill, like team development, you know, career growth, well-being, direction, whether that's technical direction or vision or whatever it is. Like, these are really important roles. Like, our default is that managers fill those roles. I think they can be filled in other ways. That's what we've done up until now. we in the end have made the decision to introduce a little bit more hierarchy, because we said we want to make sure that this stuff is taken care of. These shouldn't be part-time jobs for people. Like, these should be really important things that are core to some people's role. And if we're going to do it with one person, you want people to be able to benchmark themselves externally as well. Like, you want people to know how their role is in different, if you're going to go somewhere else, what would your job be, that sort of stuff. So I think you can do it without introducing the hierarchy. We've decided to introduce it a little bit, but our approach is let's just have the best managers. Let's just get the best managers that we could have. And we've done that by sort of trying to articulate a bit, what is it about a compassionate, trust-based culture that supports people's development? What is it about all of those things that are important in relation to the role of leaders in the business? And we've kind of articulated that in a few principles, and then we've sort of integrated that through in how we do feedback. And we're running a boot camp for all leaders in our business who are going through it. We're not calling it a training course, it's a boot camp because it's tech and it's cool. Everything needs to be rebranded, but it's not actually a training course. It is a real boot camp to get people to kind of reflect on, okay, well, if this is our sort of position and our culture and our set of challenges and all that sort of stuff, how do we as leaders show up to enable people in that context?
So, as you've said before, it's a bit of a hippie kind of approach. It might not go down with everyone. Do you think that this is something that any organization could replicate, or there's certain organizations that might be able to take some of your company philosophies and how you approach, people and culture?
Yeah. I think you can interpret it as a hippie approach. I
don't think it is. I'm being facetious.
I mean, it kind of I have to be honest, I am a bit of a hippie. I like,
yeah.
I try.
You moved out to the countryside, didn't you? So
I know, yeah, exactly. Exactly. I spent my days doing beekeeping and things like that. But do you know what? There is a real kind of business reality side to this. So all over the world, people are reflecting on their positions and they're leaving jobs because they want to go somewhere that is more meaningful for them, that better fits their life and all this sort of thing. That's not happening to all businesses, because people don't leave jobs where they already have those things. You need to make sure that you're paying people well, but you need to provide a culture that supports people to have positive well-being, good balance in their life, working on the stuff that's important to them, feeling a sense of social connection, feeling a sense of progression and direction, all of those things. You need to provide that, or people are just going to leave. So for me, it's and we've really seen that over the last few years, is that there's a lot of talk of the Great Resignation. We're certainly not experiencing it. Other companies like us who are doing similar things, I know they're also not experiencing it as well. So I would say that there's a real kind of business reality for it. I also think, you need to, it's really easy for me as a company of 300 people, move really quickly, I can have my own judgments about it. I think every business needs to look at what's important to them and how they manage things and do it their own way. I saw a really interesting panel discussion about the future of work, and then someone from Deutsche Bank and somebody from Slack, and they just got into a massive, it was basically a big argument that they were having about how the Slack guy was everyone should just be able to manage it themselves. The Deutsche Bank guy was no, we need to have centralized rules so there's fairness for everyone. It's really easy for fast growing tech companies to be this is the way to do it. This is ridiculous that you're not doing it. Deutsche Bank have got, I think, 80,000 employees and another 40,000 contractors, and they have a whole culture and legacy and every business needs to kind of work it out for themselves. But you can't tell me in any organization that thinking about how you can become more compassionate is going to have a negative impact on your business. So do you know what I mean? It's just, to me, it's a no-brainer. So I'd say everyone needs to figure it out for themselves, but focusing on what a more compassionate approach means from a cultural perspective and from a like people processes and ways of working and stuff like that. Like there's huge benefits for that.
But even just simple things like you've said around just communicating with people who will be affected by decisions, getting input from those, being willing to iterate, not just thinking you've got it right the first time. So, having opinions right, but holding them loosely and being willing to take on information and continuously improve. Like that's kind of on top of the compassion and the trust stuff that you're talking about. I think those are simple things that might be easier for companies to start to adopt those sorts of processes.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think that is really, for us, I think that really comes from our CEO. It's something, we don't get everything right, but when we get it wrong, he'll always front up and be like, we just don't know, or we're unsure about it, or yeah, we've made a mistake here, we need to address it. And having that, when people see that that's the approach that you take, they're almost like when you do really bugger it up, they're a lot more forgiving,
Yeah, like you said, if you've you've consulted with people that'll be affected, you've spoken to someone who is an expert or has expertise on the subject, well, give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, well, you've talked to the people who'll be affected, you've gotten the best advice that you can, and if you didn't give it a shot, you wouldn't have learnt anything. So
yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing about what you're saying is, it's when you think about well-being, psychological wellness, physical wellness, all these sorts of things, it's easy to get wrapped up in that like recover bit, like let's provide lots of stuff for people that like policy supports, the things I've talked about, access to counsellors, but actually that prevent part, I think like you're saying, Jason, it's about kind of making sure that there's transparency, that people feel like there's fairness, that they understand that the rules of the game, support them to get along, and all of these sorts of things. Like there's a lot about the culture of the organization to think about there beyond just like sticking plasters on it.
Absolutely.
So I think, I guess embedding this kind of culture when you're able to do it from the very beginning, is a different experience to trying to change a culture that's very much been built on, power dynamics and hierarchies and, essentially a perspective that views employees as fundamentally just trying to steal your money. If I want to take it to the most cynical perspective. So do you have tips for organizations who are interested in moving more towards the type of wellbeing philosophy that you've been able to establish at Zappi?
Yeah. I think you're totally right. And the first thing is you need to get really clear of what it is that you want. Because like you say, if there's misalignment, or if there's things that are not being said about the direction, like if you really want this kind of culture, then make sure that everyone's on the same page about it, particularly your senior team, because they are going to, they are going to have a sizable impact in terms of how this stuff comes across. So yeah, I think be very clear on what you want and be clear with other people as well. Like this is the kind of thing that we want. And to me, this goes back to the approach of what is your vision? What are you like? How are you shooting for the stars? What are you trying to achieve? And then I think it's about listening to people and trying to understand their experiences and understand where, like what is in line with what you're looking to do, and where are the pain points, like where do people have different experiences from that. And from that, you can start to build up a bit of a map of things that you can try. When I think about culture change, I think it's really easy to fall into a kind of project management, like let's manage this change. So let's go through the stages. Let's identify the things we're going to do. Let's deliver them. Let's put a Gantt chart together. We'll work through it all that. Culture is complex. It's like nuanced. It's hard to put your finger on. The things that you try will change it, and they'll also change your approach. So I really always try to think about it as a sort of sense and respond. So get real clarity on where you're trying to go, understand the current experience so that you can build up some experiments with like, click, we're going to try this. How are we going to know what impact it's had? maybe that's asking people, maybe that's like trying something for a few months and seeing how a certain people metric changes or something like that. Like get real clear on how you're going to measure how this thing works, and then just sense and respond. Like then try something else, then try something else. And I think it's really easy to fall into, like, we have this whole paradigm about organizations and how, like, it's almost like a mechanical paradigm of like, we need to engineer the organization, or how are we going to move the needle on this thing? It's all very mechanical, but the reality is they're like super organic systems, aren't they? So all you can really do is just try stuff, make sure you understand how you're going to assess how it's working, and then just continue to evolve your approach. So that would be my recommendation. Vision, use the vision, understand, listen to people, gather the pain points, define experiments, and then just try them and see what happens.
Yeah, I like the micro experiments approach, because it's I guess it's easier to get to convince people that we can give this a go, because it's relatively low risk typically, because you're doing it on a small scale in a constrained sort of situation, and you're able to then say, well, how are we going to measure it, and then we can make some decisions about what we want to do from there. So being clear about the constraints around that micro experiment, I think are quite important, especially for those organizational cultures that do view, I guess, the company in that machine type analogy rather than an ecosystem analogy, to give that, I guess, a greater sense of security around what's actually happening.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about this in big businesses, I mentioned that example of EDF. So the way that came about is they had an internal an internal project to say, can we think about really progressive, forward-looking ways of running our businesses that will help us achieve better results? And there was a couple of leaders that said, yeah, look, there's these ideas we can try. And then they were given the the freedom to experiment with those in a few different of their utilities and power plants, proved that it works, and then we're able to expand it out. Because I think, like you say, when you're having to deal with multiple stakeholders and people who might raise very valid concerns, all these sort of things, like they want evidence, right? Like I'm in a very lucky position where my perspective on things is very much in line with the values of the business, and so when I want to try stuff, it's quite easy to move quite quickly. I don't have to do too much convincing a lot of the time, but yeah, I totally recognize the need for evidence when you're doing a lot of these things as well.
And I think, particularly when you start talking about, high hazard industries and high risk work, the stakes get a lot higher.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Well, Tom, it's been a really interesting conversation with you today, learning a bit more about some of your philosophies and how you're actually enacting those at Zappi. One of the questions we always ask all of our guests, though, is around what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
Yeah, for me, it's about more human-centric cultures and organizations, more compassion, more understanding of people. So really, really listening to people before we act. And also greater empowerment for people to make work fit their needs and fit and balance their lifestyles. I feel like I personally, I feel part of a whole swathe of companies that are putting more emphasis on these things. And I think it's really exciting because you sort of think about the impact that it has on people's lives when you work in an organization like that, and then the impact that has on the people around them, and see this like halo effect of positivity. So that's what gets me out of bed.
Yeah, that's something good to aspire to, for sure.
Absolutely. Do you have words of advice for listeners who are sort of thinking about moving into the employee wellbeing or psych health and safety space?
Yeah, do you know what? I think the work is really challenging. You're dealing here with like, there's business pressures, there's like individuals' lives, people's lives and experiences. So I find it often really challenging, but it's super, super meaningful. Being able to wake up every day, create a more supportive culture that empowers people, that gets people excited, all that sort of stuff is a real privilege. also think it's a real responsibility on us. So yeah, it's just a really incredible space to work in. And I think the other thing I would say is, going back to one of the things we mentioned earlier on, is, take care of yourself and recognize the potential toll that this kind of work can have on you, and just take care of your own emotional intelligence and everything, and recognize even on the really bad days, those things will pass. Really own the good stuff, and just keep doing the work.
Put your own oxygen mask on first before assisting others. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Tom, it's been, really interesting chat. I think you may even be the first person who's been like a people and culture background even on. We have a lot of academics or risk professionals or health and safety professionals. So really great to hear that what you're doing really is dealing with the design of work that has flow-on effects for employee wellbeing. And even though we haven't talked about risk management at all and psychosocial hazards, what we've talked about are supporting factors for employee wellbeing and taking a continuous improvement approach, which is definitely part of a risk management approach to psychological health. So really good fit.
Sort of building the bones of the organization that will actually support the design of work to go in a way that's protective of mental health.
But this is why health and safety and HR need to work together, right? Yeah. Because what we've been hearing from Tom is, hey, here's all these things we can do to actually improve the design and experience of work. And your health and safety professionals might not get that, but they'll understand how to measure, as you talked about, was important if you're running these micro experiments. How are we measuring risk? How are we measuring improvements, monitoring the effectiveness of controls that Tom is designing, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, really great to hear not just the philosophy, but how that philosophy is actually being driven by activities. And I love the idea of the minimal viable policy as well, as someone who doesn't really like policies for policy's sake. So yeah, great. No, really fascinating and really great way to finish the show, I think.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time, Tom.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks both for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome. Well, look, for our listeners, that does bring us to the end. So remember, we do videos these over Zoom when we have the interviews with our amazing guests. So you can check out those videos on the Flourish GX YouTube page. We'll also take some short snippets from this video and we'll put that on the Flourish GX LinkedIn page if you prefer the short form snippets versus the long form podcast. While you're on LinkedIn, you can connect with Joelle and myself. Tom, working for a tech company, I'm sure you're on LinkedIn as well. So if you want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to us via DM. But that's it, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.